My name is Kevin, and I am 16 years old. Life was pretty normal for my family. We lived in a nice neighborhood that was getting ready for Halloween. People carved pumpkins and put out spooky decorations. It was my favorite time of the year. Then, on October 31st, came an emergency broadcast that the TV put out that morning. It hasn't stopped playing since. It went something like this. The president has declared a state of national emergency. All citizens are advised to shelter in their homes from sunset to sunrise on October 31st, Halloween night. Be prepared with whatever supplies necessary to stay in your home all night. It is advisable to purchase a firearm if you do not already own one. Do not go outdoors. Shelter in a central part of your home, away from all windows. This message played on a loop on the TV and was broadcasted on our phones occasionally. I was asleep, blissfully unaware of the panic the town had been cast into, when my father woke me. He told me we were going to make a run to the store for the things we would need. He left my bedroom without explanation, but I could tell something was wrong. I got dressed quickly and ran downstairs where I saw the broadcast blaring on the TV. Fear rose in my chest. Why did we have to shelter inside? And why did they want us to be armed? My father had a hunting rifle, but I had only seen him take it out once. That's when my mother chimed in. "Kids, let's go." My family loaded into the car in a state of shock. Well, at least I was in shock. My younger brother and sister were old enough to understand what was going on, but not really old enough to care. My anxiety reached its peak when we made it in town. People had gone mad. Shoppers raced to empty the shelves of canned goods and water. By the time we had made it to the store, it was mostly barren. We were able to get some water and food items that were less desirable. On the way home, my father stopped at a small gun store. It too was overran, but after almost an hour, my dad came out with a small black box. By the time we made it home, it was late afternoon. The neighborhood had been transformed. It more resembled something out of a movie than the place I had grown up. Many of the houses had boards across the windows, and people scurried about, taking supplies into their homes. My family unloaded the van as my mother rushed all of us inside. The TV still played that broadcast on repeat. As it played, I gave it some more thought. What did everyone think was going to happen? All this panic, and no one had even identified a threat. We simply feared because we were told to be afraid. I was starting to think the whole thing was an elaborate prank. My parents didn't look like they felt the same, however. My mom was filling all the sinks and bathtubs with water, while my dad boarded up as many windows as he could with what little wood he could scrounge up. It was crazy how fast everything had changed. Just a few hours before, I was resting peacefully in my bed. Everyone kept up at this pace. Meanwhile, I was supposed to be watching my siblings. Afternoon faded to evening, and with it came an unsettling quiet. The neighborhood had fallen silent. Darkness descended upon everything as the last wisps of sunlight spilled over rooftops. Shadows began to grow across yards and up and down the streets. Everyone was hiding in their homes. And from what? Decorations still hung where they were supposed to celebrate Halloween. Instead, they made the scene even more sinister as the skeletons lay on lawns and ghosts swayed from trees. My parents had made us retreat upstairs, where they stashed all of our supplies for the night. I peered out my window as darkness slowly engulfed everything. It was an abnormally dark night. Few lights remained on. The ones that did created pools of light that stood like islands in the inky black sea of night. Suddenly, I saw movement down the street. At first, I wasn't certain I had seen anything at all. Then, more movement. Something was definitely in the road. But what? I kept a watch from my second-story vantage point. It was coming closer, seeming to make its way towards the cul-de-sac where my house stood. I couldn't see it well in the darkness, but one of the houses it was nearing had a floodlight on over the garage. The light mostly died out in the driveway, but enough spilled into the street that I could certainly see a figure moving now. It was low to the ground, like it was moving on all four limbs. I say limbs because it didn't have a human shape. Could it be a dog? It passed the dim rays of light and returned to an ocean of black. I lost sight of the thing. I tried to tell myself that it was probably a dog, but it didn't look quite right. I couldn't be certain, but for a second I could swear I saw its legs, bent in irregular directions, like that of an arachnid. Also, it didn't have that little trot that dogs do. Instead, it moved slowly, and with great deliberation. As I gazed out my window and watched the sparse pools of light, I noticed a thick fog settling over everything. Minutes flew past, as I watched the fog choke out the remaining illumination cast from the occasional light post. I looked out in horror, as my neighborhood was completely obstructed from sight. I ran to my parents' bedroom, where I rambled on about fog and some weird creature I'd seen. My father had his rifle leaning against the wall, obviously loaded. He looked nervous, as did my mother. Just then, we heard something. A subtle scratching came from downstairs. My mother gathered up the kids, as my father went to investigate. He made his way down the stairs, just approaching the bottom when the house was plunged into darkness. Everyone shrieked and my mom yelled at my dad to come back. "I'm fine," he said in response as he flicked on his phone for light. "I don't have any service though. Do you?" "No," my mother responded. "I'm going to see if the neighbors have any power," he said as he peeled back the curtains. "The whole neighborhood is out, even the light poles," was the last thing my father ever said to me. At that moment, 2 arms burst through the glass. I use the word arms loosely, as they were not human. Pitch black limbs wrapped around my father, as a short scream left his chest. He didn't have time for much else. The limbs had multiple joints and seemed to bend in impossible directions. Slowly, my dad was ripped out of the window, right in front of me. I wish it had happened like in the movies, where someone is just sucked out. My father was not so lucky. The window didn't fully break, so when he was drug out, his abdomen, arms, and legs got caught on jagged pieces of glass that acted like razor blades, cutting deep into his flesh as he was pulled out the window over the course of an eternity. I stood there in horror and disbelief. The sight was so painful my brain just couldn't process it. My mind was reeling, already making up alternate explanations for what I just witnessed. Anything not to accept what I just saw. My mother grabbed me by my arm and yanked me into her bedroom. My siblings were crying, but even in my dazed state, I knew they were shielded from what had happened, unable to see the pool of blood in front of the window, or the chunks of flesh that still clung to jagged glass. My mom slammed the door shut. She did her best to keep the kids quiet. I wish she had done a better job. Before long, we could hear something downstairs. I say something because it didn't sound like the footsteps of any human or any creature I had ever heard of. Whatever was in the house was heavy, and it moved slowly about. It was searching from room to room, and finally it made its way to the staircase. One step at a time, we listened in horror as it made its ascent. Whatever it was might not have been bipedal, but it was hard to tell just by listening. Without hesitation, it crept to the bedroom door. Silence fell, as it stood on the other side. I don't know what I expected. A growl, a snort as it smelled the air, something. Even it slamming its body weight into the door as it tried to break it down. What I didn't expect was to hear my father's voice say, "Open the door, honey. I just want to see the kids."